Fall of the greatest Islamic empire by Europeans. Forget the Battle of Lepanto, the failed siege of Vienna. It was ultimately traders that took down the Ottoman Empire, not soldiers. Let me trace some of the details. In the Ottoman Empire, guilds controlled all manufacturing and they protected their members by locking out competition. One guild had a monopoly on producing soap, while another had a monopoly on making shoes. The guilds couldn't exploit their monopoly positions to jack up prices, because the state imposed limits on how much they could charge. The state protected the public and the guilds protected their members. Everything balanced. Then Westerners came into the system. They didn't compete with the guilds by trying to sell soap. The state wouldn't let them. They came looking for stuff to buy, raw materials mainly, meat, leather, wood, oil, metals, whatever they could get their hands on. Suppliers were happy to sell to them, and even the state smiled on this trade, because it brought gold into the empire, and how could that be a bad thing? Unfortunately, the Europeans were after the same materials the guilds needed to make their products, and the Europeans could outbid the guilds because they had the gold of the Americas in their satchels, while the guilds had only their profits, which were limited by government price controls. They could not make up the difference with volume by producing and selling more goods. That is because they just couldn't get enough raw materials to increase production. With foreigners sucking those out of Ottoman territories and shipping them to Europe, artisans in the Ottoman world felt the pinch. Domestic production began to fall. Ottoman officials saw the problem and dealt with it by banning the export of strategic raw materials needed by domestic industries. But laws of this type only opened up contraband opportunities. When exporting wool is a crime, only criminals will export wool. A black market economy began to thrive. A whole class of nouveau riche black market entrepreneurs emerged. And since they were breaking the law to make money, they had to bribe various officials to look the other way, which opened up opportunities for corruption, which spawned another class of nouveau riche entrepreneurs, bribe-battened bureaucrats. So now a lot of folks had illegal cash to spend that didn't come out of any increased productivity. It was cash funneled into the Ottoman economy by free-spending Europeans drawing on the gold of the Americas. But what could the newly rich Ottoman citizens spend their money on? Investing in above-board industries was out. It would attract unwelcome attention from the state. So they did what drug dealers do in modern American society. They spent freely on extravagant luxury items. In the Ottoman world, these included consumer goods from the West, which could be had for cash paid under the table. The very trends undermining Ottoman ability to manufacture goods were providing a market for European industry and incidentally draining the gold back to Europe. Outside cash coming into the Ottoman system just as production was falling generated inflation. That's what happens when you have more money chasing fewer goods. The same pattern is happening in certain urban areas in Nigeria, where a few people are getting fabulously rich from Yahoo. With no apparent source of income, you see people driving Benz. Ordinary jeans start selling for over 30,000 naira. Even bread finally costs more. Whom does inflation hurt? It hurts people on fixed incomes. These days, we tend to equate fixed income with small income. We think of pensioners living on pensions. In Ottoman society, there was no pension system. Families and communities took care of their own elderly and sick. No, in Ottoman society, the people on fixed incomes were the salaried government bureaucrats and more particularly the salaried officials of the court that bloated, wholly non-productive upper class. Those fixed income folks were rich beyond the dreams of Croesus, but even the richest of the rich somehow feel threatened when their buying power goes down. In 1929, when the U.S. stock market crashed, some of those bankers who famously jumped out of high-rise windows were still worth $1 million when they hit the sidewalk. How much they had didn't matter. It was how much less they had that got to them. Similarly, in Ottoman society, inflation made rich courtiers living on fixed salaries feel like they had to tighten their belts, and this they didn't like. They began to supplement their incomes by wielding the only instrument they controlled. What do courtiers and bureaucrats control? Access to the administrative and legal workings of the state. When people have no role except to provide access, however, they have no power except to deny access. Courtiers and bureaucrats in the Ottoman Empire began to prevent instead of facilitate, unless they were given bribes. The Ottoman Empire became a paperwork nightmare. To negotiate one's way through it, a person needed to bribe people who knew people who knew people who could bribe people who could bribe other people who knew people. To combat this gumming up of the works, the state raised salaries, so that courtiers and bureaucrats wouldn't feel the need to take bribes. But the state didn't have any source of extra funds based in real productivity, especially since, with the empire no longer expanding, the state did not have the revenue that traditionally flowed into its coffers from conquest. In order to raise salaries, pensions, and soldiers' wages, therefore, the empire had to simply print money. Printing money spurs inflation, which puts us back where we started. Everything the Ottoman government did to stem corruption and promote efficiency only aggravated the problem it was trying to solve. Eventually, government officials gave up and decided to hire some consultants to come in and help them set things in order. The advisors they hired were management consultants and technical experts from the continent that seemed to know how. And that continent is Europe.